Welcome to the Do You Ever Wonder podcast. Ever find yourself wondering about the world's biggest topics? Join your host, Mike Haltman, CEO, board chair, and all-around deep thinker, as he dives into real estate, investing, national security, self-improvement, dating, networking, finance, and so much more. Expert guests, real conversations, no limits. Hit subscribe and get ready for insights, surprises, and conversations that will make you think. The Do You Ever Wonder podcast starts now.
Hi, everyone. This is Mike Haltman. I am your host, the host of the Do You Ever Wonder podcast. And today we have a very interesting guest. His name is Elliot Daigneault. I pronounce it the American way. He's French Canadian. But in any event, I saw Elliot on a segment on TV, and he was talking about the dangers of the declining birth rates around the world. And I know that in the United States, we know that this is an issue. We don't really know how serious an issue is. It is, but if a society doesn't regenerate itself, then that society dies. So, welcome, Elliot.
Hey, thanks for having me on, Michael. And I like the intro, by the way.
Thank you. I cover a lot of things, man. Dating one of them, obviously.
Yeah, you know what? It's the root of the birth rate. Without dating, there ain't gonna be any kids. So
Exactly. So I had these two sisters on once. They created a company, an AI dating app, where it just looks at your face and analyzes your face. No profile, no nothing, and it matches you up with people. It recognizes, I guess, what your personality is. But
interesting.
very interesting.
AI
Very.
is a field that I don't think it's been implemented much in the dating world. It's been touching the sphere of so many other things, but at least I haven't seen it.
Yeah.
It could be interesting. I know Open AI, so ChatGPT, they want to bring erotica on their app now, so that's something. But I don't think that's going to be helping people date though.
No, no, I agree. That's not going to be a conduit to dating. No question. But yeah, so it's interesting. But so I found your segment very interesting because you seem very well versed on the subject of birth rate. So, uh, Elliot is the CEO and founder of BizBiz Share,
That's correct, yes.
which is an interesting business enterprise where businesses basically share underutilized assets.
Absolutely, you're spot on.
Yeah, no, that's great. But you do also have a lot of ideas, and you seem to be a thinker on a lot of other subjects. So how did you get into birth rates?
Yeah, well, I mean, how did I even get into posting videos online? I
Mm.
mean, you know, it started maybe a year ago. I was invited, actually, thanks to my company, on a podcast that discussed or interviewed business people around Montreal, where I'm from in Canada. And me and the host kind of hit it off. His name is Curtis, and had a great conversation. And that video had the best metrics that he's had over the last couple of years. So he invited me back on again a couple months later, and again had great turnout. So we decided to kind of make this our own show. But we realized instead of talking about business, we spoke about politics and world news and just topics that are trending and that matter to us, to our age group cohort, but also to Canada and I guess the Western world. And throughout the research that I was doing for one of our episodes, something just came to my attention. There's crazy amount of immigration in Canada, and I spent a lot of time in Europe as well. I live half the year over there in Portugal, and there's crazy amount of immigration in Portugal as well and in Europe. And I started wondering, why is that? Like, what's the root cause? What's the reason why we need to open the floodgates like that? And for better or for worse, the main core issue is the fact that the native population just is not sustaining itself. And if you do not have a sustainable, healthy population, your economy will inadvertently collapse. There's no ifs or buts. You're starting to see it right now in Japan and in South Korea as well. And countries really are left with two choices. They can either try to promote the birth rate, which is super hard, and many countries have tried, and the incentives are there, it just doesn't seem to work. Or you just open the floodgates of immigration. And then sadly, that comes with a host of other issues. You're effectively putting a band-aid. You're getting a quick fix that will help your economy in the short term, but to the detriment of your entire civilization.
So there's and I talk about it all the time, the famous unintended consequences that arise. You know, you do what you think is a good idea, for whether it is a good idea or not is debatable, but nothing comes without consequences, and sometimes those can be severe and sometimes potentially positive, but sometimes very negative. So,
Mhm.
no, go on.
Well, I was just going to say, the issue with governments oftentimes is, and this is kind of a flaw of democracy. I mean, I'm a big proponent of democracy. I'm not condoning dictatorships or monarchies, but the problem with democracy is that most governments shift every 3, 4, 5 years, depending on, the jurisdiction. So politicians don't have the incentive to plan for a long-term solution. Things are always rooted in short-term fixes because it's what's going to get them votes in the short term. We see this with economic policy, we see this with social policies. But sadly, a nation needs to be built over decades, over generations. And that's the kind of planning and forethought that should be had in governments, but that doesn't happen. So yes, of course, it leads to these ineloquent solutions that tend to cause more harm long term than good.
We're going through that right now with you know, this government shutdown. The kicking the can down the road. All they're trying to do is to have a continuing resolution to keep the government open, which would just keep it open while they still don't come up with a way to solve the problem, and it would go into another continuing resolution, but politics get in the way. There's a midterm election coming up, and it's the proverbial shit show. And again, to your point, everyone's yeah, every 2 years in our country, Congress people have to get reelected. So
Yeah.
basically, as soon as they're sworn in, they're fundraising, and
Yeah,
then
they're campaigning again, right? So it's 2 years for congressmen, and I believe it's 6 for senators, right? Yeah.
correct. But the pan yeah, I'll give you unintended consequences. I'm in the real estate business. 2019 a law was passed that looked like it was great for tenants. The unintended consequences are that it's terrible for tenants because it's really bad for owners. And but the bulk of the voters are tenants. So you pander and do whatever you need to for them, but at the end of the day, not so good. So, in a society like Canada, like the United States, what birth rate do you need to perpetuate the species?
Yeah, well, I mean, any civilization requires 2.11 kids per woman in terms of fertility rate. That is what we call the replacement rate, the bare minimum. You would like it to be a little bit higher, but at least at 2.11, society sustains itself. You have what's called a healthy um, age group pyramid or I guess birth rate pyramid. So when you look at if you kind of map in your head different age groups, right, from 1 years old all the way to 100 years old, men and women on both sides, and you want it to be higher at the bottom, right, like a pyramid. And as people age, obviously it tapers off. That's a healthy society. You always have a fresh base of new blood and eventually a healthy contributing workforce, right? People between the age of 18 to 65. That's what you want. Sadly, right now we're seeing it inverse. So there's more boomers and Gen X than there are millennials and Generation Z. And eventually that is again not sustainable because even though the US has perhaps less social programs than Canada, you guys still have Social Security to pay for, and you still have, a government to fund, and you have all these agencies, and that requires, a working, sustainable economy.
Yeah, this is statistic. I don't have it off the top of my head, but the number of workers who were supporting Medicare and Social Security at one point in our society, and I don't think it was that long ago, was substantial enough that you could do that. And now you have so many less workers and so many more people retiring. I just started on Social Security and Medicare, and hopefully, knock on wood, there'll be enough people around to support me until I'm gone.
I think you'll be good. I think
Okay, I hope
your
so.
generation, you'll be fine. The issue is probably going to start with my generation. So I'm born in 91. I'm 34 years old. And we're already here in Canada starting to talk about cutting these entitlement programs. The biggest line item in the Canadian federal budget, and not to dive too deep into Canada, but it's what we call old age security, which is like social security, if you wish. It's a guaranteed payment for anyone over 65 years old. And it represents over a quarter of our entire budget, and it's slated only to keep increasing. Sadly, our population there's not enough young blood again to sustain
Right,
that. So
right.
they're starting to talk about how to cut it. And what's messed up is that then it disenfranchises the younger generations. They're saying, wait, like I've been in the workforce since I'm 18. I've been paying taxes since I'm 18 at the tune of 50% per paycheck. It's like, hey, are you telling me I won't be able to benefit from it? You know?
Well, I mean, there are solutions, if it came to that of raising the age from 65 to 68, or
Mhm.
raising the age from 60, in the US, I think it's 62 that you can start to collect. They could raise that to 65. There are ways, but yeah, I mean, in terms of, if you're a politician running for office, you're really not going to do very well running on that. So,
Mhm.
yeah, that's the problem. That's why politicians should not be career politicians. It was never meant to be a full-time job for your entire life, but
Mhm.
that's what the trappings of Washington in the United States, I think, are very lucrative.
Well, it does seem so, right? And that's across the West, but obviously the US being, very I mean, it is the center of the world economically and culturally speaking as well, so lots of eyes there. The amount of politicians that go into the public sector or public function and turn out to become multi-zillionaires. Don't know how they do it. Don't
Well,
know how they do it.
well, I'll tell you one way they do it, and not to we want to talk about birth rate, but there's a an election in New Jersey, and
Mhm.
one of the candidates for governor was asked, you accumulated $7 million since your time in Washington, how did you do that? She goes, and she couldn't answer. She was like, did I collect that? Did I raise that? And one of the reasons in the United States is for senators and congresspeople, there's no regulation saying they can't do insider trading. So,
Well, Nancy Pelosi is the best one there is. She's
yeah,
she's the instead of calling her the Omaha Oracle like Buffett, we should call her the DC Oracle.
absolutely. Try, yeah. But this woman was on the defense committee or the arms committee. So she knew where
Mhm.
things were going to happen and profited from it. And there's really nothing wrong with it. She should own it, but nobody likes to own those kinds of sketchy things.
No, and and again, I do want to bring it back to the birth rate because that's why that's the discussion
Right.
you wanted to have.
Yeah.
But I'll just make a point real quick about the fact that it leads to an interesting thought experiment, which is, right now politicians both in, Canada and the US, their salaries is good, but it's not like get rich good technically, right? They're making, low six figures.
100%.
Now, the thing is this, does that lead to people kind of, taking the matter into their own hands or perhaps being corruptible? And meanwhile, you look at a country like Singapore, they took a way different approach. They're paying their prime minister and their president, they're paying millions of US dollars per year. They're huge salaries. And even their parliamentaries, they're making like mid-million dollar salaries. Their ideas is if you're already rich and you're being paid a lot, there's less odds of you being corrupt. That's number one. And two, we want the best of the best. And the amount of people that will forego a public function job in order to stay in the private sector because it's more lucrative could lead to a sort of brain drain away from, running the country or being in government positions. There's merit to an extent. I'm not sold 100%, but there's an idea behind it.
Well, I laugh only because I see the quality of some of these people who are serving in our Congress, and I think that brain drain has already started. But you talk about trying to limit, giving people enough money so that they're not tempted to do.
Mm.
I don't know if you saw this today, but there was a huge indictment of NBA basketball players, coaches, and retired players who were in conjunction with the mob. They were they were fixing games, and they were involved in an incredible poker scandal with high technology. One player who left the game saying his foot hurt, and they know that it was crap. He's making what's he making this year? Maybe, I don't know, 25 or 75 million, and he did that game leave 9 minutes in to make 200 grand. So,
It's insane. That is
you know
wild.
what?
Yeah.
I think greedy people are going to always be greedy people, and the
Yeah.
lure of easy money.
Yeah.
So now this guy's going to go to jail. He didn't need the money, but it's hard. You know,
Yeah.
what is it? Power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. So you go to Washington and you see what's
Hmm.
going on. You see what the potential is, the lobbyists, the this, the that. I'm sure it's hard. You go there with the best intentions, most people, but the lore of the other side of the coin must be very strong.
Yeah, human nature sadly kind of lends and tends to fall into greed. And that's not even to talk about
Hey,
all the shadowy stuff that happens behind closed doors that we'll never be privy to either, because
100%.
I'm sure that happens.
No, I'm sure it does. I'm sure it does. So our birth rates are low.
Hmm.
Europe's birth rate is worse than the United
Oh,
States and Canada.
far worse. Europe is a dead continent.
So you think, listen, the migrant crisis, so you
Hmm.
think that was more or is more of a master plan than it is of just the general goodness and largesse of people running these countries, even though the unintended consequences are immense.
Um, Look, if you ask me what my true, real opinion is, if I'm not gonna be neutral and tell you exactly what I think the plummeting birth rate is by design so that we have this migration, so that we have eventually a replacement of the people, the native population. I mean, there's nowhere, because, the low birth rate is a symptom. It's not a natural thing. There are countries that are developed countries that do not succumb to a low birth rate. And we've been told always, the more you develop, the less kids you have. Well, the US was okay for the last 100 years. It's only very recently. And guess what? The US was still an economic powerhouse over the last 100 years. So there's something there at play.
But you can't manipulate people deciding not to give birth.
Oh, of course you can. Absolutely you can. I mean, there are many. Okay, so first of all, let's take the homemakers. Let's take women and tell them that from now on, their aspiration should not to be the best wife and the best mother ever, but rather to be absolutely independent, to never rely on any man, and to go out there into the workforce and be boss babes. I mean, I'm all for freedom and equality. I think it's a beautiful thing. And both can coexist. Women can be absolutely free to pursue their aspirations while not villainizing the status quo has been forever, which is, hey, ultimately, one day it'd be good for you to pursue having a family. It's the most fulfilling thing you can do. You have kids. I have a son as well, and it's hard, but guess what? Ultimately, it is, in my humble opinion, the most fulfilling thing someone can do. So there's that aspect. Then after that, you can, through inflation and through horrible economic policy, slowly but surely erode people's wealth because the poorer people are, the more they need to work. The more they need to work, the less time they have for families, right? So whereas again, 100 years ago in the US, a blue collar worker could sustain a family of four, have a house, two cars, and live a decent, honest life. Today, that is impossible. A blue collar worker in most cases requires his wife to also work because you just cannot sustain a family on one income. It's basic, economics 101. If you double the supply of workers, you have the value of each worker. So there's that. And I mean I could keep pushing and pushing and pushing, but I
Well,
think through lots of variables you can absolutely plummet or destroy a birth rate in a country.
well, what do you think has caused the cost of living to rise to a point where, I mean, do you think that it is such a coordinated effort? You can't just make the cost of living go up. I mean, I guess there are ways to do that with, manipulation of the dollar or whatever. But, you know, I mean, do you
Pray
think
for
that?
money. The M2 money supply goes up, money velocity goes up, and then with it's also a self-sustaining vicious circle. The less birth rate there is, the more migration you need, the more migration you have, especially if it's unfeathered. Because the thing is this, we're not capping it at like, okay, we're gonna bring in only say 1.5 million people because that's the amount that is the deficit for the year for our society, for example, to have 2.11 kids. So if, for example, at the end of the year, a government looked, okay, there's been X amount of live birth, it gives us a birth rate of, let's say, 1.7. We need 2.11. So, okay, we're going to make up the deficit by importing X amount of migrants. Look, like I'm a hunter, okay, for example, and white-tailed deer here in Quebec and Canada, you need a tag, a license. Now, you're only allowed to shoot a buck, a male, right? But if there's an overpopulation of deers based on conservation numbers, they will issue also a draft, a lottery where you can bid to get a doe tag, so a female tag as well. You can shoot and hunt a female. And that's the way we cull or control a population within a certain number. Governments can do the opposite. Instead of culling people, let's never do that. They can import the right amount of people to keep the birth rate at a steady rate. But that's not what they're doing. They're using the excuse and the pretext to flood the country. And that's the issue. And flooding the country eventually leads also to a shortage of housing, a shortage of job, and you're creating this death spiral. I mean, look, Canada's worse in terms of migration than the US, and right now the average home price in Canada is $1 million. You can see, and this is striking, go to Niagara, right? On one side you have Ontario, the province of Ontario, and on the other side you have New York, right? You have Buffalo, the Buffalo region, I guess. Well, it's separated by a river. One side, like I mean, it's literally separated by a river. It's basically one town, but the Canadian side, all the houses are $1 million plus, and the American side, all the houses are 150 to $300,000. It's striking the difference, and that's due to these kinds of policies.
Well, so the time went pretty quickly, but what is a country to do if they are so inclined? How do you reverse the birth rate? How do you sustain and put a foundation under your society?
And that's not an easy thing. I mean, we've seen, take Denmark. Denmark has tried paying families a certain fee or a certain forfeiting sums of money to promote, every kid that's born, you make X amount of dollars. Recently, Poland just implemented a policy which is as soon as a family has two kids, they forego paying income tax from there on in. So the Denmark thing has not worked. The Polish one, the Poland one solution is brand new. So we'll see if that's going to promote things. But ultimately, I think it goes back to education because money is one thing for sure. And it is an incentive to an extent. But I mean, in Canada, you make insane amounts of money from child benefit. I mean, every kid or every child here can earn you up to roughly $800 per month. So oddly enough, it's the migrants who come here that take advantage of that because they have six, seven kids and they slap on all those $800 checks. But the local population is not so inclined. So I think it starts from the root. It's a societal thing. It's promoting against family value. It's promoting again the joy, the beauty of marriage or finding a relationship. It's not pushing so much always the corporate ideology of, you need to work day in, day out, 24/7. And then afterwards, it's also sadly making the cost of living affordable because until people are able to sustain themselves and families are capable of having, living off one income earners, there's not going to be a big difference because, and you see it, I mean, especially at the age that I'm at now, more and more of my peers are starting to have kids, and you listen to the mother and they say, I would love to stay at home. I would love to take care of my kid, my son, my daughter, but I can't. I need to go back to work. It's
It's huge. No, it's definitely huge, and you know that like they use the cliche of trying to turn a battleship around in a bathtub. You know, how are you going to turn that around? I don't know. So I don't know what's the prognosis for
mm.
our future.
Well, another thing too is that it's perhaps too late already. And sadly, the US, we're at 1.7. 1.7 is historically below what any civilization has been able to overcome. 1.8 is the limit that historically a civilization has been able to shift and to overcome. In Canada, we're at 1.4. I think it's over for us. There's no turning back. Most of Europe, and I mean, I have a map right here. Spain is at 1.23, France is at 1.64, England's at 1.54. Italy's at 1.21. I mean, they're all way below the 1.8 historical limit. I think these countries are done for.
So, I guess it starts with the elderly people who are going to have to forego a certain amount of benefits they thought they were going to have, and then it's a matter of you don't have enough people to work the fields and work the factories and maintain life the way we know it.
Yeah, I mean, there's also a point to be made about unleashing economic might because I do think Canada and the US are in a peculiar position. Europe has a hard time right now economically. Their economy is just not doing very well, and sadly, they're kind of putting. But the US could be even more of a powerhouse. You guys are already number one economy in the world, but I mean, it could be even greater if you only unlock the true power. There's a lot of red tape. There's a lot of pushback as well for various fields, from fossil fuel to offshore exploration. There's a lot of things that could be done that is not being done. Canada, and that's the one that blows my mind. We could, and sorry to say, guys, we could be the richest country in the world. We have
Your
more natural
natural
resources
resources, ridiculous.
than we have more natural resources than every country combined. Not combined, but in the world. We're third largest oil reserve in the world, so we're ahead of the US. We have all minerals you could think of, lumber, forestry, fisheries, you name it. Everything is here, plus water, which is going to be the next liquid gold. Um, and sadly, same thing, our government refuses to extract or to touch these resources. There's red tape left and right, and it just makes us broke ultimately. So, but what I'm trying to tie in here, the point I'm trying to make is that the US and Canada could be a miracle in the sense that if we truly decide our civilizations or societies, we will unleash the true economic might that we have and perhaps even make a union and make a partnership because we could be amazing allies. Then perhaps our economies could boom in a miracle fashion, akin to the 1990s Japanese economic miracle. And with that, create a environment where people finally don't have to cut all those programs. You don't have to cut the entitlements. You can actually sustain them with a smaller producing cohort of people. But I mean, that requires us to start working today at it, not tomorrow, but today.
And at least in the United States, with the government closed, I don't think it's going to happen today. But you
No,
never
for
know.
sure. However, the government being closed does seem to be a great way to start cutting into the government a little bit, it seems.
You know what? I mean, the fact that you call people non-essential workers, I think is a very, that can't be a very good feeling.
No, but and I mean, look, maybe I'm a little bit extremist, but there are some workers in governments that perhaps are part of the bloat, you know? And again, the US is not as bad. I mean, my views being a little bit more extreme might be due to the fact that consider that in Canada, around 20% of the entire adult workforce works for the public sector. That is one out of five workers works for the government, which is a non-productive industry, right? It does not really produce anything.
Right.
And you got to keep in mind that they're big pensions, they're amazing programs, they're amazing insurance, nice big cushy salary. So it's estimated right now that you need something like three private sector workers to sustain one public sector jobs. The math doesn't math on our end.
No, and it's kind of upside down.
Yeah,
They're,
so the US is not as bad, but you guys still have a bit of bloat in the government too.
oh,
So it's
no
it's it
question.
sucks,
All you got
but
to do is go to the Department of Motor Vehicles. No offense to anyone who works there, but you know,
yeah.
I mean,
Yes,
it's
definitely.
definitely a lot of bloat. But Elliot, this was great, man, and let's get back together in 6 months or a year or 2 years or probably I guess 5 years and see where we are, see what our societies look like. Hopefully, hopefully there's hope.
You know what? I am hopeful. I'd rather be hopeful than doom and gloom. But
Right.
thank you for having me on. It's greatly appreciated.
It's my pleasure.
Thanks for tuning in. See you next time. That's a wrap for this episode of Do You Ever Wonder? Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the show, hit that subscribe button, share it with a friend, and drop us a review. We'll be back soon with more insights, experts, and conversations that make you think. See you next time. Do you ever wonder where curiosity meets conversation?